Thank you very much, Caroline, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure to be here after all these years. I've been in previous SEMRACs in 2012. That was the comeback after '99, the last time before I left for the US. And then also last year, but I was not there, but there were still a few projects. Some students were already there. Here this year, it's a pleasure to present what we are doing in Strasbourg. And being here also reminding me these early years, and also the opportunities that you can have in life, and in particular in meeting people like Yvon, who proposed this awesome opportunity to spend the summer here at the SEMRACs. I learned a lot, of course, in computer science. I liked it a lot, but also meeting guys like you to discuss about science, about mathematics, about scientific computing. A real pleasure. So being able to meet people in this kind of event is really a great opportunity. I had other ones afterwards, but that was an excellent start. Well, I must say the first meeting for me was Olivier Pironneau when I was a student. I started working on FreeFEM at the time. It was even before. Okay, but now it's not FreeFEM, it's Fil++. I'm not going to talk really about Fil++, but rather about some applications that we are working on, and methodologies, some methodologies we are working on and which are integrated into Fil++. So the lab is IRMA, so more like a pure mathematics lab. There are a few applied mathematicians in it since a few years. Of course, we work with, it's a UMR, with CNRS, and we have the opportunities to have a LabX, which funded a lot of the work that are being presented here, and also the LabX AMIES. AMIES is the Agency for Mathematics and Enterprises. I'm actually a manager in AMIES, and if you are interested in AMIES, for the French guys, or also for foreigners who are interested in the setup we have in France, feel free to come to me and ask questions how we do it in France, how it works with the funding. We have a lot of opportunities for collaboration with enterprise. You won't see, well, there is one which will be presented later, but the math enterprise collaboration at Semosis are not presented here. This is another presentation. But feel free to come and ask me questions about AMIES. I would be delighted to answer your questions. Okay, so basically, well, a very short introduction of Semosis, what we are doing there. Then some application, basically the flagship applications that we are working on. And then, well, computational frameworks, more like methodology some methodology framework that we have in Fil++. All this work couldn't have been done without all the people who are here, from colleague researchers to PhD students, even master students, where you have one here. And people also not only in Strasbourg, but also in Grenoble, and also in foreign countries. So I'm very happy to have various collaborations to work on this, and this is actually necessary to solve these problems. Of course, you need mathematics to solve the problems that we are going to talk about, but you also need people like in physics, computer science, biology. You need also money, of course. So you need all kinds of things to solve or to start solving these problems. So maybe the people who are on this board can stand up, and who are, of course, here, can stand up so that you know, the people here know who you are. So these are the guys who came here and who are involved in the various projects here. Of course, they are not involved in all the projects, but some have a pretty deep involvement in all of this. Okay, so what about Semosis? Semosis is, when I was in Grenoble, we created Memosine with Stéphane Labbé, which was Maison de la modélisation et de la simulation, nanosciences and environnement. So basically, an interface between mathematics and other disciplines, and mathematics and enterprises. When I arrived in Grenoble, in Strasbourg, I created similar structure, although the culture in Strasbourg was a little bit different. There was far less multidisciplinary project, and actually relatively little in mathematics. Well, in mathematics, you had already the people working in the fusion project, like ITER, like Philippe or Michel. Philippe, you already saw yesterday, but the collaboration were mostly outside the university with the CEA, but also with astrophysicists, but I think it came later in the, well, I'm not sure. I don't want to say things which are wrong or not quite accurate, but still. So we started various collaborations, and basically we have now, I can say that we have three main areas: collaboration with companies, about well, a bit less than 10 so far, because it's quite productive in this area, very interesting, but also in the area of physics and the area of health. So you will see collaboration today in physics and in health, and there is, of course, overlapping between these domains. So the first one is more like in physics. It's with the large-scale equipment in Grenoble called LNCMI, Laboratoire National des Champs Magnétiques Intenses, so large high-field magnets in Grenoble. So what is a high-field magnetic field? Is a magnetic field which is above 24 Tesla. Below, you can produce this field, for example, with superconductivity magnets. But above, you need to rely on resistive magnets in order to reach higher fields. To give you an idea about the scales that you can have, so it starts from the human brain, very little, very small Tesla, 10⁻12, to the larger scale, which is when you are in the galaxy, close to a pulsar or magnetar. I strongly disadvise to go near this kind of objects. It's not very good for life. So giga-Tesla, order of hundreds of giga-Tesla. You have the magnetic field of the Earth, about the micro-Tesla, pacemakers, millitesla, MRIs, a few Teslas. And we are here with what we are doing, tens of Teslas, 36 in Grenoble. The Americans managed to reach up to 40 Teslas. This is the highest, the record, the world record. This is a high competition, actually, to reach the highest Tesla for continuous field. But then you have also pulse magnetic fields, which have been reached in the US up to 100 Tesla, and even almost 3,000 Teslas in Russia. But at this level, you almost destroy, or you destroy the magnets. It's an extremely violent process. So we are in this area. This is the highest field that you can have in the world at the moment. So what is it? It's a piece that's about this size, where you have here, you have a certain kind of, I think it's a polyhelix magnet, so you have various kind of magnets. You have some holes in the magnets in order to put some water, because you need to cool them down. When you put the current inside, basically you will have to evacuate about 5 megawatts of energy, which are produced by these magnets at the highest fields. So you need to cool them down. So hundreds of liters per minute are going through these magnets. And what you do is that you put, you see here a small hole. This is the tube where you are going to put the object that is of interest for you. So basically, people use these magnets in order to study matter and use magnetic resonance in order to understand how the materials are set up. In particular, for the last few years, Graphene has been studied a lot in this kind of facility. Graphene is a material that is used in compliant screens. So you know the screens that you will be able to fold in your pocket. This is for TV or for whatever. I mean, this is quite impressive technology, and that has been tested in this kind of magnet. Other type of experiments is, for example, to counteract gravity and to have microgravity context inside that magnet in order, for example, to understand the behavior of hydrogen in motors of Ariane or satellites in space. So they make experiments, levitation experiments in there. It's about 100 times cheaper than parabolic flights, or which are even also themselves 100 times cheaper than sending experiment in space. So several orders of magnitude cheaper than doing experiment in space. But this is only about this size, huh? So the size of the experiment. So you have here the magnet that we are working on in terms of design. This is a magnet that will allow us to reach up to, we hope, up to 45 Tesla in the next hour, in the next year. They are currently bringing the electric system from 25 megawatts to 35 megawatts in order to be able to put enough power in this system. So it's a very big installation. Actually, when you are in this experiment, it's not very impressive in the rooms. Huh? You have monitors, a small hall, but it's when you go below that it's absolutely amazing to see how it works in terms of engineering. And in order to, so what are we doing there? We are helping there to do the design of these magnets. It's multi-physics. You need to handle different kind of models. We are at the limit of what we can do with materials currently. So we are at the limit everywhere. And so we try to make the most of the design and help them with uncertainty, which are inside the design. So what we've built so far is different kind of models. So here, at the beginning, they were mostly using analytical or axisymmetric models, but now we have brought 3D models for their magnets. We have, in terms of geometry, for simple geometries, to almost the full housing of the magnet. So that's what you saw here. This is the full housing of the magnet. This is the magnet, but its inside is kind of, this is really big. Huh? The magnets are not that big. And you want to do different kind of studies, from simple parametric study up to robust optimization that will cost you a lot. Here, UQ, this kind of thing. Okay. And, so there are various requirements that were asked by the lab in terms of development. So how does that work? You put some current in these magnets. The current goes through the resistive magnets. Then with Joule effect, you have temperature increase. You cool this down by putting some water inside those holes. The current modeling actually for hydraulics is relatively simple. It's 0D models done through the thermoelectric model with boundary conditions that handle the water flow. The thermic load induces dilatation for the elasticity part. And there are also, but when you put the current inside the magnet, you have also a magnetic field which is generated here. The magnetic field induces forces on the mechanical part, and the dilatation from the thermal load also induces forces on the mechanical part. All these models are coupled through non-linearly coupled. Okay. In order to achieve that, we build a framework which is based basically on the Durham diagram to move data or information from one approximation to the other. So we work with both H1, HDiv, HCurl, L2 approximations. And in Field++, in particular, we made sure to provide relatively seamless operators that allow to pass or to go from one to the other in an efficient, seamlessly parallel way, and doing that in a mathematical correct way. Let's have a look at the different. There are quite a few equations. So I go from one block to the other. The thermoelectric model, nonlinear. So here you have the equation on the potential. Here on the temperature, you see here the Joule effect. So this is basically you have the current here, the current density. This is electric conductivity, thermal conductivity here. And nonlinearity look like this. Yeah. So in terms of equations, it's not that complicated. What is a little bit more complicated is the geometry. The geometry, actually, it took us more time to make the geometry rather than solving the equations. You have more than 300 geometrical components inside. Maybe you see here there are some cuts inside the magnet. These cuts are done in a block of copper, but they are not really copper. They are not in. You cannot have them by setting a fire in a room at SNCF. This is a special copper that can handle the thermal load and the magnetic loads on this magnets. And they, with electrophoresis, I have no idea in English how it's electrophoresis, they are cutting through the magnets. Makes this geometry, and in order to have electrical arcs between the various cuts, they put some insulation components. Okay. So this is how we solve for the temperature and the potential. Then we have two ways to solve for the magnetic field. There is a very important field for this magnet. It's the magnetic field seen by the user, the experimentalist. The user would like to have a control on the magnetic field, a very high quality. He wants to be able to do his experiment with a control accuracy on the magnet. And they have devised various experimental measurements. And here we actually have developed a little tool that allows to compute the magnetic field with Biot-Savart. The problem with Biot-Savart is that it's not nice with parallel computing, and it can be relatively easy to compute the magnetic field with this, but we managed to have a quite efficient implementation of Biot-Savart, which allows us to compute the magnetic field either basically in areas where we don't have the conductors. So what we see here is that along the vertical axis, we have a pretty good agreement between experiments, the Biot-Savart computation, and also a 2D axis model. Whereas here, you see that when you go next in this direction, when you go close to the conductor, the 2D axis model is not good, or is actually far worse than the Biot-Savart, and Biot-Savart actually provides a relatively good approximation with respect to the experiment. And here what you see is the relative error between the computed value and the experiments. Another way to compute the magnetic field, this time we want to have the magnetic field everywhere, everywhere, in a domain of interest and also in the conductors, because we will want to then pass this information to the structure mechanics. So in that case, we go to the magnetostatic equations with two kinds of formulation, a regularized one and a saddle point one. recall that since you have to solve for this equation for the potential vector where J is electric density, here, but the solution, you obtain it up to a gradient of a scalar field. So in order to ensure unicity of the solution, either you add the regularized term, or you introduce an extra constraint. You impose that the divergence of the magnetic potential is actually 0. Okay. In order to solve that for this kind of geometry, you need a very, very efficient solver, and you have some work by Hittmeyer. Hittmeyer developed auxiliary spaces preconditioner for this kind of problem, which provide efficient way to solve this kind of problem. But actually, the setup is not quite trivial. You need some work, but you have some very efficient implementation available by the American labs, particularly the people from Hyper. So this is the kind of results that you can compute with this kind of model. So here you see the magnetic field inside the magnets and different kind of evaluation along the vertical axis or the horizontal axis to verify that everything is in order. The next step is for the structural part. So we solve here for the elasticity equation. We have a relatively simple model where we include both the Lorentz force plus the thermal load in order to compute for the displacement inside the magnet. And we have Tresca von Mises indices, which allow us to verify if the magnet is going to break or where it's going to be sensitive. So this model, all these models, for example, they are used to design the magnets, but they are also used to make post-mortem diagnostic. Sometimes they break magnets, and they are used to actually understand what was the problem and what occurred in the magnet. Okay, so we have this big model, coupled nonlinear physics. Now the physicists, the engineers would like to use this model not only in the R&D office, but also outside. For example, they would like to make the calibration of the magnet. They would like to characterize the magnet, and in order to do that, they will be very happy to have access to, let's say, the simulation tools. But of course, simulation can be difficult to bring outside R&D offices, and so we have developed reduced order methods based on reduced basis methods, which some of you saw a talk or a course by Yvon, I think, last week. I'm not sure about what was inside the talk, but basically we have developed for the recent years, during the last few years, with Cécile Daversin, who's finishing her PhD, methodology which allows to recover a reduced order model for nonlinear multiphysics equation. We called this algorithm SER. SER means simultaneous empirical interpolation method and reduced basis method. So what does it, or you have the HAL reference, if you like, for the paper that we submitted recently. This algorithm, basically, when you are in a nonlinear configuration for reduced basis, in order to recover fast online computation, you need to have the so-called affine decomposition for your PDE. So in order to have this affine decomposition, you trigger your best tool, which is the empirical interpolation method. Problem is that in the empirical interpolation method, you have a greedy algorithm, which in our case, in the nonlinear case, which would involve for each sample of the greedy algorithm, require evaluation of our big 3D code. So if you have hundreds, several hundreds, even thousands of computation, that would be extremely expensive to use this methodology. Well, we did it. Okay, we were very patient for the computations. We wanted to make sure that it was actually working, that is, a reduced basis methodology was going through, and it's going through. So what we thought was actually to replace in the greedy algorithm, we replace in the greedy algorithm the finite element solve by the reduced basis solve. So basically, what you do is that when you start this EIM algorithm, you have already access to an affine decomposition, a very coarse one. So you have approximated your PDE with a very coarse, another PDE, which would be very coarsely approximated. And from there, you can actually trigger your reduced basis methodology. So we do it. We go to reduced basis. We build our one reduced basis, one basis function, and when we go back to EIM, and so on and so forth. So basically, we go back and forth between reduced basis and EIM, and simultaneously, we have our IIM and reduced basis approximation for our model. What you see here is the convergence of, this is here the standard method when you apply the finite element solve in the greedy part of AIM. So here you see the decrease for this benchmark, which was proposed by Greppel, Yvon, and other people. So we apply this benchmark, and here you see the error, the max of the error on the field U, and here this is the max of the error on the output S. The output S is the mean of the function U over the domain. So here this is the standard method with finite element solve in the greedy IIM code. And then here, what you have is the coarsest possible in this array. You have the coarsest possible approximation. It means that we start with IIM. We have one term in the decomposition. We do reduced basis. We have one function. Then we go back. We have a second IIM. We have a second reduced basis, so on and so forth. But the reduced basis are never recomputed on the affine decomposition. We keep the basis functions that were computed on their own affine decomposition. So here, if n is the number of basis functions in your reduced basis space, we have had only n plus 1 finite element solve for the SER algorithm. So here you have 26, you have 26 finite element solve that were actually the n. By recomputing the finite element solution, you gain a little bit, but not that much. So it's actually quite good. So I call it SER1. In the first article, it was only SER. Why SER1? Because now we have SER-L, so multi-level SER. So the thing is that if you compare now, this is here, the convergence rate for the greedy algorithm of the AIM algorithm. This line here is the convergence for the SER1 algorithm. Here you have the convergence for the standard and the higher level SER algorithm. And you see that we recover, by just applying SER a second time, we use SER1 in order in the greedy algorithm. So now we have a good approximation for, and fast approximation for the solution of our model, and we use it in the greedy of IIM at the next level. And it improves, in a very nice way, the convergence rate. So, and here you have SER2 and SER3 for the error on the U and the output. So this is quite good. Now we have applied this algorithm to our high-field magnet application. In this case, we used only a piece of a so-called bitter magnet, which is used most everywhere in the world, and it was developed by an American engineer. So here you have the holes where we have the fluid, the water going through. So you have the setup of the model here. And you see the result of the SER algorithm, that first that it converges, and here you see SER1 is here for AIM, and here SER2 and SER3. Quite interesting result. At least it improves in a nice way the results. So this technology, the reduced basis technology, we implemented it into Field++, and we have now a framework in order to do real-time simulation. So we have built, this is one application, so this is the bitter magnet that you see here. This is a plugin into ParaView. So ParaView, I think a lot of you know this plugin. And on the right here, you have an interface which allows you to change the parameters. So what are the parameters? You have, for example, the heat transfer coefficient, so material the heat transfer coefficient, the current density, the cooling water temperature, and here you have the material properties also, which are accessible. So now you can change, for example, these parameters. And as you change this parameter, you see that the visualization, of course, is changing. We are actually doing the computation at the same time, in real time. This is a nonlinear model which is solved here. You can see that it solves in 0.3 seconds, but when Vincent Chaban is going to be done in the next few days, it should be like 10 or 100 times faster. There are some small details which are actually complicated to handle, but here you have real-time visualization. Actually, what is costing the most is the visualization. You have 3D visualization here, and this costs quite a bit when you do the visualization. Okay, so here you see it reduces the calculation, and you have the plots. You can do that in also for different kind of models. So, for example, oops, this is not the right one. Sorry. Okay. This is the demo effect. So now what you see is an apartment with various rooms. That is not good. You see an apartment with the different rooms, doors. You have here heaters. And what you see is the temperature, the 3D temperature map inside an apartment, which is computed in real time. In this case, we are actually tenths of milliseconds, 0.1 or 0.2 milliseconds in order to do the calculation. And here you change the parameters. For example, here's the heater in the kitchen, or you can change the materials or the insulation of the apartment, the size of the insulation, and you have in real time the maps that are recomputed. So this is for the 3D visualization if you want to have 3D visualization here. We have various kind of other example of this technology. Okay, let's get back to the presentation. So this is called ForFastSim. You can have some information here on the website of Semosis. We have actually a maturation project at the SAT in Alsace, and we are trying to find industrial partners to develop the technology. Now I go to the biomedical application. So IFIMAGNET will be at the SEMRAX. We have one PhD student working on this, Romain Hilde. And now I go to the, we're going to change quite a bit, to go to the biomedical application that we are going to work on at the SEMRAX. So here we are interested in, first in blood rheology. We have developed for the last few years with a physics lab in Grenoble called the LIFI. We had some PhD theses. For example, Vincent Doyeux, who's here, defending most of the results are from his PhD thesis. And we have a postdoc, Thibaut Métivet, who now took the flame and continues the work. We have a paper also submitted on HAL and to a newspaper, to a journal on this the last few days. So the object of interest here is the red blood cells under flow. So we are interested in modeling those red blood cells for various reasons. For example, to be able to develop, that would be the physicists are interested in having some kind of blood constitutive law. And they are developing this model in order to understand, for example, in the case of illness such as sickle red blood cells or anemia, what is the impact on the blood viscosity, and in particular, if with a simple test, rheology test, we can actually diagnose this kind of sickness. Currently, diagnosing blood illness is costly and takes time. The idea would be to develop a much faster diagnosis by, for example, testing the blood properties, the blood rheological properties. So here, our model will be relatively simple. In the SEMRAX, we are going to work on a bit more complex, but here we are interested basically in a two-fluid problem separated by a membrane, which will be the membrane of our red blood cell. And this membrane has some properties. First, it's non-porous, it's non-extensible, and it requires energy in order to bend it. Here, K is the curvature of the membrane. In order to do that, we use a Level-Set framework. Just to recall, for the Level-Set framework, we need a so-called sign distance function, which is positive outside the domain which is drawn by the membrane, negative inside the domain, at 0 on the membrane boundary. From this function, sign distance function, you can recover the normal and the curvature. Under flow, you will have to solve for an advection equation for the distance function, which is advected by the velocity of the fluid. And for the fluid, you solve for the Navier-Stokes equation. Well, in our case, it's more like the Stokes equations. This is more like in the Stokes regime. And the sign distance function allow you to define the viscosity and the density parameters of the Navier-Stokes equations using the Heaviside function, which is derived by the sign function, the sign distance. With the sign distance function, you can also easily define surface tension, gravity, bending forces. Okay. So the Navier-Stokes framework is relatively simple in order to solve for the problem. So we use a non-monolithic approach. We solve for Navier-Stokes. We advect the level set. We update the parameters and forces, and we loop on this. So we can, for example, do some benchmark. Here you have bubbles, so you have only surface tension. You have a bubble with a low surface tension, here higher surface tension. You have some benchmark in the literature for this kind of thing, for drops. And the paper that we submitted is actually benchmarking our framework in this context. We have compared also with other software and experiments, and everything is all right. A specificity perhaps that is of interest in Field++ is that the sign distance function, when you have it, you lose the distance property of the phi function. And in order to recover it, you need to apply either to solve, for example, for the Hamilton-Jacobi equation, or to apply some fast marching method. Fast marching provides some pretty good result in terms of accuracy, but it's essentially a sequential algorithm. So you need to parallelize it, and we did it in Field++. You don't have any gain in parallel, but it works in parallel with the rest of the framework. So there are various comparisons between the two alternatives in the paper. It's quite interesting. Another thing is that we also use high-order approximation for the level set. Now, if we go for the red blood cells, well, this is some work which is quite old already by Vincent Doyeux. Here you have some videos done by experimentalists at the LIFI laboratory, where they are actually interested in the vesicle or red blood cell in shear flow, where you have a high contrast of the fluid parameters inside and outside the vesicles. And in that case, what happens is that the red blood cell is going to tumble. And with the model that was developed for the red blood cells, we managed to recover the tumbling effects. You can have also in the case where the viscosity contrast is not so high, well, it's the same. You don't have the tumbling effect, but rather the tongue threading effect, where the red blood cell is actually turning on itself, like. So we recover this, so it allows to validate on a simple our model for the red blood cells. Another experiment is to be able to compute the effective viscosity of shear flow with various red blood cells. You have a periodic domain here, and we compute the viscous dissipation here over time of this array of red blood cells. Another experiment that you can do is you can put what the physicists are doing is that they are studying the red blood cells into microfluidic networks, and here we reproduce these flows on a T section here. So you see that the red blood cells are actually taking shapes that are that we can see in actual experiments, and in particular, don't remember here you see they can have some kind of chausson shape. I don't know in English how to say that, but they take shapes that you can see in actual experiments. And here we have actually not one level set to handle all these vesicles, but two level sets. The red ones are considered LC level set, or LC red blood cells, and the black ones are actually thick, in the sense that they are more rigid. So they deform less, and we see how they behave under flow. So this is a part of a project that we have here at the SEMRAX. It's just starting. Huh? So you have all kind of, we are not doing this kind of, as mathematicians, we are not doing this. This is a job of a group of biologists led by Jackie Goetz at INSERM, and Sébastien Arep is a physicist at IPCMS in Strasbourg. And they are doing in vivo and in vitro experiments to understand the impact of hemodynamics on the attachment sites of tumor cells in the vascular system. And they are now interested in silico modeling and simulation of this. So we are starting. We are going to work on this at the same racks in a very, let's say, we start. So we'll see what we can expect. But the good model in terms of experiments, the good model is actually a zebrafish. Zebrafish is an interesting model because it's transparent. So you can optically see through the zebrafish, and you can follow. Here, I don't know if you see it, so they put nanoparticles inside the zebrafish, and they follow the bloodstream inside the system here. And so they have all kinds of experiments where they follow tumor cells inside the system, and depending on the hemodynamics, they see that the attachment site can be in the arterial system, in the trail of the fish, or in the venous system. So it depends on hemodynamics, and in particular, to see that, they induce with pharmaceutical products higher flow rate, lower flow rate, or normal flow rate. And we try to reproduce that with, for now, a very simple model of this part of the fish that you can see here, that was done with CAD, but actually with commercial software and our own homegrown image reconstruction software, we could not reconstruct the vascular system for now of the zebrafish. So this is something that we are going. So here in that case, we are going to have CFD plus level set for the tumors, red blood cells, and possibly also compliance of the arterial walls. So we are going to put a lot of technology in this and methodology. The last kind of application we are working on is a project Viva Brain, which is funded by the National Research Agency, where you have physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists working on this loop. Here, we start from MRI images, we reconstruct the vascular system, venous and arterial, and then we simulate the blood flow inside the system, and we model the MRI virtually to reproduce virtual angiographies of the brain flow. So what is the interest here is that we would like, at least with this system, to be able to validate the whole tool chain, software tool chain for the reconstruction. So it's quite a bit of work. In our case, we are involved in, of course, the blood simulation, but also we take care of the whole tool chain at Semosis. And you'll see that we managed to build almost the full pipeline from MRI images here. We have a set of sequences which allow us to go from these images to computational meshes, simulation, and the last loop is being worked on, but we have not yet integrated into the software pipeline. This pipeline is called AngioTK. You have a version available on the web, but it's rather old. If you are interested, contact us, and we'll see how to integrate you in the project. It will be available freely at the end of the project. We have a lot of data, also medical data from MRI, about 40 patients, which went into the machine. So I'm one of them. It was interesting. Only the LC people could go there. We don't have access to pathological people. It's only physiology. So the first part is to actually apply some filters that allow to extract the vessels, to extract the scene structure that are the vessels. The next step is, oops, this is not the next, so this, I don't put all the steps, okay. Then, that's, okay, I'm missing some steps, sorry. Well, then we have various stages which allow us to extract the vessels, then reconstruct them with a nice surface. So you see here the meshes are actually quite nice. And we do the simulations. So you see here some streamlines. But in the process, there's quite a few difficulties. So here, this is, for example, what the mesh look like when you do the first extraction. So you see that this is not usable by computational codes. You have holes everywhere. The elements are in very bad shape. You have this kind of thing here. Well, this is maybe nice for visualization, but not for computation. And then, well, we have various stages in order to improve the mesh. So here, this is the next step where we have some parts were cut. You have also here the boundaries of the vessels, or the tails of the vessels, and we need to cut them here and then to put this needs to be done automatically. We put the boundaries here. So this is done automatically. But there are issues, for example, where you have vessels which are merged. You need to be able to detect that. So for example, here, the vessels are merged. And so you don't know if it's a bifurcation or if it's actually two vessels. And so we have an automatic way to detect this and to produce a proper segmentation. So here, this is without doing anything. Unfortunately, we have this connection between the two vessels. And here, we managed to cut this. So, and in the end, we managed to produce the venous and arterial network. And you see that the difficulties were in this part where you have the two vessels. I don't see it anymore. Here, in this area. Okay. And then automatically, in an easy way, you can simulate blood flow inside the arterial or the venous system. Our idea is to actually do the full system, venous and arterial, but we need to provide a model to handle, let's say, what's between the arterial and the venous system. So we need some modeling now in order to make the link between the two. And actually, with Marcella Sopos and Vincent Chaban, we published also a paper on the influence of modeling choices for the cerebral venous network. There is a lot of work on the arterial system, but relatively little on the venous one. And it's very hard to find data in the literature. So we took as much as we could, and we did various experiments to understand the impact of the various choices. Well, I won't go into the details, but in this case, actually, the post-processing was as costly as the actual processing. We had computed various sensitivity indices, which cost a lot in order to understand the impact of the various choices. Inflow is, of course, very important, but also outflow and also Newtonian versus non-Newtonian. There are various other checks inside the paper. Currently, we are working on pressure boundary condition for this, because actually the venous system is driven by pressure. You have high pressure coming from the capillaries system, and you have a low pressure in the chest that drives the flow from the brain to the cardiovascular part. And so we are proposing special boundary treatment for pressure-driven flow. This is a work with Marcella, Vincent, and Silvia Bertoluzza. And we are going to work also on connecting arterial and venous system. Connected to Viva Brain, we are also working on another project called I2Brain. This is an international project with Giovanna Guidoboni from IUPUI in the US, Alon Harris, an ophthalmologist. Giovanna spent 2 years with us in Strasbourg on a chair, Gutenberg chair. And the idea is to develop, to understand, to model the flows and in the eye and in the brain, so that will be through Viva Brain, and connect the two. The eye is extremely interesting because it provides an open window to your entire system. And here we would like to use the eye as a window to the brain, and in particular to help diagnose neurodegenerative diseases. So currently we're actually working on the glaucoma diseases, which induces steady but not nice loss of vision. So we have developed various models for the eye, and particularly ODE-based, that allows to recover the flows inside the eye, and also access components in the eye which are not available to actual measurement by ophthalmologists in their okay. So this is a work, multidisciplinary work, and we have a PhD starting in September, Lorenzo, who's going to work on that, but actually is going to work on the eye and a full 3D model of the various flows inside the eye, but also the mechanical part. Now I realize that I'm reaching the end of the talk. In order to do all this, we build on Field++, which is an open source software which allows you to use Galerkin methods, continuous Galerkin, discontinuous Galerkin, from 1D to 3D, but also on manifolds, on surfaces, edges in 2D, 3D, or surfaces in 3D. Seamless parallel computing, so we want to hide this part. So end users who are not physicists or biologists, they just want to see the models. And of course, you need interpolation tools. We use many grids in complex applications, so you need to be able to pass information from one grid to the other. And you need, this is a workhorse, you need to have powerful solvers. The beginning, we had both Trilinos and PETSy in Field++. We didn't have the manpower to maintain both interfaces, so now we use PETSy and SLEPSy. SLEPSy is for eigenvalue problems. Okay, so we have a quite advanced use of PETSy. And I think Matthew Knipley was here last week to present you what you can do with PETSy. It's actually very, very nice. I'm going to skip that. We have various toolboxes which are available for free in Field++, CFD, computational solid mechanics, FSI. It's available in Field++. You have advanced numerical methods, ALE, level set, fictitious domain. So for example, here you have a flow around a flag here. Oops. So here, this is a fictitious domain. The domain is, you have a rectangle, and then you have a fictitious domain with a FSI coupling between the fictitious domain here and the Navier-Stokes flow inside. And we use a fat boundary method in order to handle the fictitious domain. Regarding actually PETSy, or what we have in Field++ in terms of solvers. So we use, of course, the PETSy preconditioners. We are very happy when direct solvers can be used, like MUMS, or, for example. So this is a default solver. But then quite often you have to use all kinds of different strategies. And in particular, I would like to mention the field split methodology or framework in PETSy, which allows to compose and create very advanced solution strategy in a very generic way. This is extremely interesting framework. I strongly advise that you have a look at it if you are working with high-performance computing and you need to solve big problems and possibly multi-physics problems. We have in-house substructuring preconditioner, in particular work by Pierre Jolivet and Frédéric Nata, Frédéric H, which is coupled with Field++. And also we have developed an HP mortar for elliptic problem framework. We have also some Navier-Stokes block factorization preconditioner, which are wired in. We have a lot of Navier-Stokes application. You need to have very fast solvers. Okay, well, Yvon and Tony are here, so I put some slides for the mortar, but I think I'm at the end of the talk, so I need to skip that part. Just to say that for this work, we actually managed to develop a very efficient and scalable solver. with very good properties. But the work is only in 2D so far. We are working in 3D. This is a joint work with Silvia Bertoluzza, Nicole Pennacchio, Abdoulaye Samake, who did his PhD on this. And actually, there is a nice theoretical result on this. But we showed numerically that, at least on the test we did, that the preconditioner was behaving a much better way than in the theoretical case. Here, this is the behavior of our preconditioner. This is a condition number for our problem. It's the HP, so it depends on H and P, and here H, gig H, is the number the subdomain sizes. P is the polynomial order. This is a local mesh size. And here, actually, what we see is only the dependence, numerically, the dependence on this. We don't see this dependence at all. So it doesn't grow with the polynomial order. But unfortunately, from a theoretical point of view, we cannot remove it. It comes from the mortar projection here. But so far, we have not seen the impact on this from the numerical point of view. We have made various tests. Speed-ups, weak scalability, strong scalability, and the preconditioner behaves in a very nice way. So I think the slides will be available. Maybe the feat was that we tested up to 40,000 cores on Curie. And this was a weak scalability test, and we, from polynomial order 1 to 4, and we stayed above 90% efficiency. The last, but not the least part, we started working on HDG methods recently. So we have started to support HDG method in Fil++. We had already the DG1, but HDG requires a little bit more features from the computational point of view. Just as a reminder, HDG provides various advantages, in particular, optimal approximation for the primal and flux variables. You don't have any penalization parameters, so it's much better for tuning. You have less degrees of freedom, coupled degrees of freedom, thanks to the introduction of a Lagrange multiplier for the traces. You have superconvergence properties that you can recover with post-processing once you have done your solve. It's open to mortaring techniques and allows for different computational or approximation choices. The idea is to rewrite the problem as a set of local problems in each element, and to introduce a trace of your primate variable, which is going to uncouple the approximation in each element. And then we have transmission conditions, which are set globally, but done in a weakly sense, in order to solve the global problem. Our contribution is first implementation, but from a theoretical and numerical point of view, in our application, in particular the high-field magnets and I2Brain, we have integral flux boundary condition. So we need to set integral flux boundary condition, and we have proposed a framework for that, prove the well-posedness of the problem, and it's going to be presented at a conference in October, beginning of October, at IHP in Paris for a semester of applied mathematics at IHP. So we are going to present that there, but we have already the results here. So we have some convergence plots. Here to say that we have only one for P1 in 3D, because we don't have yet static condensation for HDG, where you eliminate local degrees of freedom. Unfortunately, this feature is not yet there, but this is the work at the SEMRAX in order to improve the performances. So this is what we are going to work on for HDG here. This is a definitive enabler for this methodology. If you don't have that, don't use HGG because it costs too much in terms of memory and computational cost. Okay. Well, I'm going to skip that, but just for the record, this is a kind of variational formulation that you have to deal with. So you're good. Oh, this is for this is just a Darcy type problem. Huh? So okay, now if you are not fine with variational formulation, it's going to be bad for you. Okay, so we have various results, and for example, on the I2Brain project. This is, you have the eye here, and you have a small components at the back of the eye, which is called the lamina cribrosa. And this is a component which allows to, let's say, compensate for the pressure drop between the eye and the brain. So the lamina cribrosa is submitted to the internal ocular pressure and to the cerebral spinal fluid pressure from this part of the brain. And here, what we could simulate is the blood flow inside this component with integral boundary flux coming from a 0D model, which is here. We have this kind of boundary condition, and this is what I meant by integral boundary condition of the flux. So we have this both for the outer here, the outer boundary, and also the inner boundary. So the outer boundary provides the inlet, and the inner boundary provides the outlet, the drainage of the blood flow inside the venous system. And here you have the velocity versus time, either on the arterial part and the venous part. And we did computation for normal blood pressure people, low blood pressure people, and high blood pressure people, in order to understand the impact of this condition on the blood flow, which is important to understand in order to diagnose glaucoma. And I'm done. So we have various applications. HPC is hidden absolutely everywhere. We require quite advanced methodology in each case. With Phil++, we managed to shorten, I think, the cycles between theory and development. So, for example, that was true for I2Brain. Just maybe a small remark. The electric models here are done with OpenModelica. So for those who don't know OpenModelica, if you are doing systemic modeling coupled with 3D or other kind of model, OpenModelica is extremely interesting to develop the 0D models. This is used in industrial application a lot. And now we have started to rewrite a lot of our models into HDG framework, because in most of our applications, we don't only need the primal variable, but also the fluxes, the forces, the stresses. We need them, and we need accurate approximation. But in order to do that, we currently miss this feature, and hope that the SEMRAX will be helpful for us. And here's some kind of to-do list for the next few weeks. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions. Okay.